The following program is a production of Pioneer Public Television.
Hello and welcome to Compass, a weekly look at public affairs issues in western Minnesota, the eastern Dakotas, and northwestern Iowa. Wherever you live in our viewing area, we hope that you enjoy this program and that you'll learn something every time we join you weekly here on Compass. This week, the story is small towns and their survival. Sometimes people wonder, why do some small towns make it and others don't, and others grow and others fail? It's a difficult issue and there are lots of answers. We're just going to touch on some of them today. And to look at some of the issues involved in one Minnesota town, here's Pioneer's Laura K. Prosser.
I grew up in this area when I was young, and then I went to the cities for 15 years and retired down there and moved back here, and I've always loved this town. And when I came back, there were very few businesses open on Main Street, and it was so sad because it used to be a real bustling town at one time. We had 3 grocery stores, and we had about 3 restaurants, and we had implement dealers, and we had a drugstore, and it was a really busy town.
The lack of businesses became a challenge for Muriel Krusemark as she began to redefine her place in her hometown community once again.
I just was obsessed with trying to fill the businesses on Main Street, the empty buildings. To see empty buildings with paper on the windows or cracked windows is really pretty sad. There were like 4 empty buildings on Main Street all together, and it really looked empty, and those were the ones that we worked on first.
Krusemark went to the businesses of the community as well as the community members themselves and asked what could she do to help them. What did they need?
The things that came up, a hardware store and the healthcare mall, they were the top 2 priorities. And so the first building that we filled or that we worked on was the healthcare mall. There was a grant came across my desk in like December, and it was from Prime West of Alexandria.
The grant was for $86,000 with a stipulation of having a healthcare system in place for the next 5 years. If they lasted 5 years, the grant would never have to be repaid.
We had just simple things to start with. Before we knew it, the medical center asked if they could come in. So Prairie Ridge out of Elbow Lake moved in. Now we have a physical therapist that has increased his hours. He's here 3 days a week. We have a chiropractor that's here 2 days every week. So it is totally full right now.
With one business taken care of, Muriel looked to other towns to see what they were doing. Wadeena's Incubator Mall was one of her next inspirations. It led to the creation of Hoffman's own incubator mall, the Main Street Galleria.
We started out, we just kind of went out and got people, and we put in Main Street Galleria, which now houses about between 30 and 40 small businesses. There is just all kinds of different crafty things. And the rent is very reasonable in there, and so people at least can come out with a little bit of funds.
Businesses are all great and good for towns, but what kind of challenges do they see in a small town like Hoffman, whose Main Street is off the beaten path?
People don't think about it. They don't think that if you have taxes on your house for $500, the taxes on businesses in Hoffman are $1,500 for that same value. And people don't realize that if you don't support those businesses and they go away, who's going to pick up that tax base? It's going to be the homeowners.
Krusemark's endgame is to promote her hometown and get it bustling again. From a farmer's market to a food shelf, even an apartment complex made from the empty school building, no need is too small to incorporate into the town's future plans.
We do anything we can to make it easier or more pleasant to live here. If you don't have a hardware store and you don't have a grocery store and you don't have the basic needs places, it's really difficult to keep your people here. You almost have to think more service than retail in a small town, because the services can survive, but the retail, it's tough. It takes a lot of people for a retail to survive.
With us now are some folks who know a little bit about small towns, or even a lot about small towns, because they've worked in them, worked with them for the Extension Service and in other capacities. So, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for coming. Ryan Pesch, you're with the Extension Service?
Yeah.
Have been for quite some time?
Yep, 12 years running now, so I'm an Extension Educator in Community Economic Development.
And Cindy Bigger, you were with the Extension Service, now we call you Consultant, right?
Yes, I'm retired partially and now kind of do my own thing.
Cool. And I know I've known both of you from other committees and things we've worked on. We should mention, for full disclosure, Cindy is also kind enough to chair the Pioneer Community Advisory Board here at Pioneer. So you get to look at communities from a lot of different angles.
Yeah, it's kind of nice to have all that input and hear what's going on around our region.
Yeah, and I know you've worked with counties and you've worked with schools and you've worked with cities, so you've seen this from a lot of different angles. And of course, the story we saw was about Hoffman.
Yeah.
So tell us more about that as an example of why some communities work. Let's talk about that.
You want to start or should I?
Go ahead.
Oh. Hoffman is unique in that, not unique to small towns, but unique in that where it's positioned, where it is located, and that I think Hoffman was creative enough and smart enough to take a look at themselves and say, what can we be given all the factors that come to bear on a small community? They didn't look for the big manufacturer to save them, so that there's all these people and jobs. But they got creative. How do we, a little town of Hoffman one year built 10 homes. 10 homes in a tiny little town is a lot of homes. So how did they do that? And could other communities do that? And how did they get them there? And how did they help them? I think community leaders have to be creative and courageous.
Yeah. Yes, and Ryan, I want to bring you into the conversation here because I should have mentioned that you're part of the University of Minnesota Extension Community Economics team, so you deal with this on many different levels. Cindy mentioned creativity, so there's creativity, there's understanding the finances. What do you think about a community like Hoffman or other communities? Is it creativity? Is it economics? Is it all of it? What do you think?
Well, I think Cindy set us up pretty well on it. She's talking about there's many forces that are at play on all our small communities. Some of these are very structural, right? A lot of times we focus on these Main Street issues. You got a lot of communities with a lot of underutilized or vacant buildings, and people are like, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? Well, there's 100 years of history that is bearing down on those communities. That regionalization that we've seen in terms of retailing and services has been going on for a very long time. So it's very difficult for one small community to push up against that. And I completely agree with Cindy that the point is not so much to say, okay, we're stuck, we're boxed in this corner. How do we box ourselves out of this corner and go against kind of the laws of gravity, if you will? But instead say, what are those tangible things that we can do in our community? Let's start with what's an asset in our community, what's working well in our community. And I think at Hoffman they said, there are folks that are working in the nearby Alexandria, that are younger people, that are new in our community. How do we reach out to them? And you know what they need? They maybe need some housing. Okay, so you might not be able to recreate your economy. Sometimes people get worked into doing these really big things, but they say, you know what? What is it with that event that we've been doing for 50 years that's kind of fallen on hard times and it's not energizing or engaging people anymore? That's something we can change. There are a few new businesses or small businesses that started. How can we support those few small businesses? Or how can we look at the businesses that are already here and just say, what are 2 or 3 things that the community could do as a whole that can improve it? So I think those ones, Cindy used creativity. I use the word tangible. Okay. What are those things that those leaders and people can do that are tangible in their community? So once you get something going on some of those tangible issues, bigger things can follow.
So it sounds like it's really 2 things as I think about Hoffman and other communities that I know we've talked about during the break and other times. It sounds like it's a matter of understanding needs and strengths. The needs which maybe go well beyond the community to a broader community, such as housing or the area, but then also the strengths that the community has either in terms of location or human resources or buildings? Is it really needs and strengths that both seem to be there in most of these cases?
Yeah, and I think communities focus on assets. What makes us who we are? And they focus on those. And that tangible thing, as he was talking about, what can community people see happening? And you can put all the infrastructure you want underground and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to do it, and nobody sees it. They know it's there, but that doesn't help the whole community see something that's happening and spark all that. What's the next thing we can do? Mm-hmm. On the other hand, I'm not going to belittle the infrastructure issues in our small communities. Oh man, we have needs in that capacity. The problem is that it's very expensive, and how do these small towns with not huge populations pay for them? Mm-hmm. And we've been talking about that for a number of years now, and how do communities do that? If I believe that if people are looking at their community and saying, God, it's just not rocking, it's just not moving the way we want it to, I do think there is a way to say, what's going on over here, and why are they and why aren't we? Somebody said, well, we have the seniors and the elders in our community, and they want it the way it was. And I get that, and I understand that, because that was very wonderful for them. But that's not the reality right now. So what can communities do to change their reality somewhat and get people thinking a little differently? And boy, things are different now.
Well, and there's been a lot of attention paid to the needs. Yeah. Right? I mean, there's been a
lot
of focus when we hear these discussions, it's about the needs. It could be housing, it could be infrastructure, it could be sewer, water, it could be water quality issues, could be transportation, could be any number of things. But it's the solutions that tend to be much more of a difficult challenge. And part of what you're saying is that in some ways, nostalgia is a lousy business plan.
Yes, it is.
Right?
Yeah, it is.
Yes.
Yep.
I mean, it's a lot of fun. You can really enjoy it.
Yeah.
But unless you're going to turn it into some sort of and there are examples around the country of places that sort of go, let's just say, go cute, right? I mean, they do sort of an interesting period kind of downtown, and they go down that road. But that's nostalgia, or the ideas of nostalgia as a business plan, but not for the idea that, well, it should be the way it was, because that's not realistic.
No.
One thing I always think is that there is real strength in stories.
Yes.
And oftentimes, there are communities that are somewhat stuck, in part because their leadership, the stories they always tell themselves are about what we once were. And so as they tell themselves that story over and over and over again, there's a lot of community psychology to this kind of stuff. Like, how do you turn around a community? You have to change the psychology to a large degree, both in the leadership as well as just Joe people that live in the town. And so if the leadership are always saying, this is what we once were, wasn't it great when? It really devalues some things that people are trying to do right now. Mm-hmm. And so if you feel your town is a failure, you can reinforce it again and again and again by telling stories about how much you fail. It's important to say, let's step back, let's try to turn this around a little bit. And one of the best ways you can do it, we're both talking about kind of tangible things. It might not be a big thing now, Mm-hmm. There are these huge issues, and what people can do is they get into the deer in the headlights look, right? I mean, millions of dollars in infrastructure. How are we going to deal with that? Well, it's hard to begin dealing with those unless you're able to get some kind of success and some kind of movement that engages people. And oftentimes those are small projects. Mm-hmm. Those are small Main Street projects or small business development projects. It might be a mentoring program.
Give me an example. Small Main Street projects. Let's talk some specifics. What are the kinds of things those would be?
Well, one that would, for example, just one thing that we often do in communities is we do this called a business retention expansion effort.
Sure, BREs.
BREs. Let's instead of talking about what we think all the issues are, let's actually engage the business owners who aren't always part of the conversation and say, what are your issues? And where do you think you're going to be in the next 3 to 5 years? And what are some things that you're struggling with that could use some help? One thing we see in a lot of small towns is the issue about succession planning, right? There are a lot of baby boomers in the next 3 to 5 years, over the next 10 years, moving to retirement. If you have issues of vacancy in your community now, you're going to have bigger issues later on. So, for example, let's just host a workshop. Let's get a lawyer in there. Let's get an accountant, people that know about transition planning, finance people that can help these folks in a workshop format or one-on-one to say, how can we retain your business in this community And the only way you're going to do that is by connecting them to some kind of resource so that they can do a viable transition.
You talked right there about bringing people in, and we haven't really touched on this yet, but obviously in the story of Hoffman, for example, and I've heard this for years from other people, that, you know, Muriel Krusemark is an example of a can-do sort of person in a community. Yeah. So let's talk about people, because that's often one of the toughest things, is what are the attitudes of the people, are they the right people, and do they have the people who are smart enough and willing enough to sort of plow through whatever they see. Let's talk about people examples.
Well, I look at a person like Muriel. Do you know how many roadblocks she has hit? And she just kept going, and I have always called her the Energizer Bunny. I think everybody does. She said, well, that didn't work. What's next? What can we do? It's that not giving up. It's sharing your enthusiasm for your community. It's having a community event. Extension director in Dakota County once told me, he says, yeah, I'm going over to those new community or countries that came out of this old Soviet bloc. Sure. And I said, so what are you going to do with them? He says, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do a community celebration to get everybody there. I said, you're going to do a county fair? Just as people around here are going, our county fairs are struggling, and what are we going to do with them? Or our community festival just doesn't bring people in. You know, how are we going to do that? When you go to these new countries, that's the first thing they do. So if you're struggling, how do we think about it differently? How do we revamp it? How do we focus on what we do well? I mean, you can have a pickle festival and they might come, and you can have, I'm not sure what Hoffman's festival is, but I think they have one. Yeah. But one of their community events came on Wednesdays. They had their farmers market, and someone made food, and little kids started selling cookies and Kool-Aid, and it got to be every Wednesday a community dinner. Sure. You engage community, and you talk about what's next.
Right. Right. I think so. You're setting out what's next. What's the vision?
What can we do?
You know, what can we do in a tangible way? But it does take definitely some determination. It doesn't need to be one person. Sometimes we call this the charismatic leader that just sort of charges up front and pulls everyone along. But determined enough, because oftentimes what we see in communities, a lot of people have conversations about what we should do. We don't have any issue about these having conversations about what should be done in this town. There's a lot of those conversations that happen in this town. Sure. It's just that oftentimes when an idea gets out there, it lives in this netherworld where it's like, maybe somebody else should do that, or I'm not going to do that, or I could take a piece of that. It's helpful when you have a person that says, look, we've talked about doing this. We want to make this a success. I know what you can do to help in this effort. Can you do this? Yeah. And it's that direct ask. It's just straight up project development stuff that needs a chairperson that makes it happen. Yeah.
I like to call that person the champion, the cheerleader. Sure. And then get people to say yes.
Yep. And often to do their piece. And does that often happen in group settings where you've either got a group that is a structured civic group or just a group of citizens that get together on a regular basis? Because it strikes me as I see some of these towns too, there are these small groups where things seem to happen. Mm-hmm. They get together, they talk about the ideas. So let's talk about groups. Is that a fairly common element that you see, that there's a group of people who get together informally or formally, and then they tend to really drive these things?
I think it varies, actually. I think it has to do with the culture of your community and maybe how it's been done in the past. Now, granted, that's not always the right way to look at it. Sure. But I think some of these things bubble up when you get a bunch of moms together with their little ones, or you get the old guys at coffee every, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday morning. Things happen there. I did some work in a community in central Minnesota, and I said, they said, you need to meet with some groups. I said, okay, I'd be glad to meet with some groups. They said, the first one you have to do is go to coffee at Burger King. I said, who's there? Everybody that has to say yes in town. Communities have a culture. Sure. And those were the gatekeepers. And if they liked you and you could drink coffee with them and tell a funny joke and tell them you grew up on a farm, which sure. I could, and, and all that, then you were okay. Mm-hmm. Then we'll listen, I know that sounds weird, but it's true. You need to find who can be your champion and who can support that. And the ask is really important.
Yeah, the ask is important. One of the other pieces, too, when you talked about the people in town that you had to ask, we haven't talked yet about millennials. Mm-hmm. Because, there is a lot of this discussion, and you mentioned earlier, Cindy, that people might say, well, you know, gee, we've always done it this way, we like it this way, and this is how it is. And then there's this other issue of, well, why can't we get young people in the town? Why won't they stay? Why won't they move? And so there's often opposing forces here. But what are we hearing about what towns need to do to really attract millennials? Because much of it seems to fly in the face of traditional economic development strategies, which was build a plant and you get the young workers here. Right. And that's not necessarily the way the current economy shapes up, right?
Right. No, absolutely. I mean, we're kind of in this, we're more in the business of attracting people today than we are attracting businesses.
In other words, attracting millennials to come in because you create an environment, they want to live there, and then they will bring the jobs or invent the jobs when they get there, right?
Right.
And I think that communities have to have the technology available for the millennials. They aren't going to go to a place that doesn't have broadband or I don't even know what all those words are that bring the infrastructure for technology into a community. For a younger population, you must have that. Must.
Yeah, I mean, I think technology is absolutely important, but I think there's if you think about how people say work differently in today's age, there's a great deal more openness and fluidity in terms of both work and life. And you know, all the research that we've had from Extension, other research that you see about what attracts people to given places, really shows that what drives people to communities are quality of life indicators, right? Sure. And so as talking about before, I mean, it kind of remains to be seen right now whether millennials will be attracted to rural and small communities. We've seen this with past research. And essentially right now we have this big baby boom. We have myself, I'm a Generation X, I'm kind of in the trough, right? And then there's the baby boomlets and the millennials that are coming afterwards. It remains to be, we've seen it with my generation and generations previously, that people in those prime earning years move towards small communities for quality of life issues. They're not moving there for jobs, they're moving there because they want a safe location, they want to raise their kids, they want good education system, a place that they can fit in. And so we're at this place now where millennials, as they begin having children and moving into families, will be making those decisions.
The sort of things that in urban settings, in many cases, it was okay, kids are about ready into grade school, going to move from the starter house in the city to the suburb because of a school district desire. So I mean, it's a comparable kind of move, just to a different place, right?
Right. Right. And really, if you think about the fluidity of work and life nowadays, I really do think that those communities that are most open, most rural communities that are open and have that fluidity, those are the most, you know, creative places, interesting places, beautiful places. Those are the ones that stand the greatest chance of attracting these millennials. So I think for us that are in small communities, it's about not about kind of revamping our entire community, but understanding that mindset and as opposed to be kind of locked in the past, thinking more about how we could be more creative and dynamic communities. Because I think those are the ones that are probably most apt to attract millennials into the future.
Sure. We've only got a couple minutes left, so I want to talk a bit about tools. You mentioned that word. People, as they look at these issues, and they get energized, tools to look at it. Obviously, you mentioned research, the University Extension Service. People could go to the University Extension Service website, right? Dig around, find tools there. Business retention and expansion, or BRE, there's information there. What are some other resources people could draw on?
One of the things that research has said is that if you can have leaders in your community, build leaders, economic development will follow. So we have in rural Minnesota, we have many communities that do leadership programs. This happens to be my niche, and I love it. So I'm kind of a thing for that. But the research says if you can grow your leaders, economic development will follow. So the other thing is the ask. I really think you need to find people of all different generations and ask them, why do you live here? Why would you stay here? Why did you come here? When I worked in Polk County, the grandparents said, can't we get a website up that says, bring them home? You know, I want my grandkids and my kids to live here. There are jobs, you know. So
that's a good note to end on. And I would mention, too, that, of course, viewers could also go to pioneer.org, our website. We did a show a couple of years ago called Keys to the City, 7.5 Keys to Success in Small Towns with Jack Schultz. That's available on our website, as well as many other resources as well. So, and if you missed any of this program or would like to watch it, Please tune in and to go into pioneer.org. You can watch our videos online. Lots to watch there. And of course, if you have any questions or suggestions, go to our website as well at yourtv.org. And I'd like to thank Ryan Pesch and Cindy Bigger for coming in for a great discussion about small towns.
Thanks for having us. Very short.
Thank you. Join us next week on Compass. Thanks.